He's a gentleman who's really worked his way from the ground up, been a coach, a principal, superintendent of 2 different school districts, last being Tiger Tualatin, and now he is an accomplished person at the Department of Ed, and we're excited to introduce Superintendent Saxton.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. Good afternoon. That was weak. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We got to try one more time because we need like 90% participation in everything we do at the Department of Education. One more time. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. It's just an opportunity to show that people will rise to your level of expectation. You just have to set out what the expectation is. So it's really good to be here this afternoon. I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we have going on in the state in education. And I think it is important for you to know I spent most of my, I don't think I can say that anymore because I'm getting old enough. I used to be able to say I spent most of my career as a middle school and high school math teacher. Math, everybody's favorite subject. And as an ex-math teacher, I'd just like to ask that when you show up at like parent-teacher conferences or your child asks you about math, that you treat it about the same way as you do reading in English, as opposed to, I used to be at parent-teacher conferences, and parents would come into my room and they would say, well, I hope you don't expect my son and daughter to be very good at math, because I was never very good at math either. And I always wanted to say to them, would you say that if it was reading? I don't understand why you would just be so happy to admit that you're not as capable of math as you would like to be. But anyway, nonetheless, an ex-math teacher, and then administrator, superintendent K-12, and now I am what's called the Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction. So sometimes people want to know, why are you the Deputy Superintendent? I mean, what's that mean? What do you do exactly? And basically, I'm in charge of the Oregon Department of Education. The governor in the state of Oregon is now the Superintendent of Public Instruction, but he has other work to do, like special sessions and so forth. And so he appoints a person to be the person who runs the department, and that's me. So it's really been, I've been on the job doing this for about 14 months now. It's been very fun and engaging. We have lots going on in the state of Oregon, and we're really working hard to transform the kinds of outcomes that we give the students in the state, and it's great and important work. So in the state, we've set out this goal that we call the 40-40-20 goal. How many people have heard of 40-40-20 before? Okay, so I'll go through my spiel then, since not everybody raised their hands. So 40-40-20 means that 40% of all students would graduate from high school and go on to earn a 4-year college degree. 40% would graduate from high school and go on to earn some kind of a certificate that says I have a skill, either an AA or other kind of a work certificate that says this certificate proves that I can do work that will allow me to have a family wage job. And then 20% at the very minimum graduate from high school. So 100% of students graduate from high school, 40% basically community college, 40% higher ed, and 20% just a high school diploma. That is a really aspirational goal. Part of the reason I know it's aspirational is because when you add it up, it totals 100%. And 100% of anything is a really hard thing to achieve. And yet, it's a nuanced kind of goal, because it'd be really hard to say we're going to be successful with 98% of students in the state, or 94% of students in the state. And honestly, as you're handing your kindergartner off to the K-12 system, I would never want to stand at the door and just say, we're only going to let like 95% of you in because we only think that 95% can be successful, right? You would never want to say, and we think it, by the way, it's this child, or that child, or the other child. No, it's 100%. And the other important message around 40-40-20 is that we don't currently have a system that can deliver that kind of outcome in the state. And so it demands, if you're going to achieve 40-40-20, it demands that you change the system in really fundamental ways. And if you don't change the system, you have absolutely no chance of accomplishing that as a goal. Right now in the state of Oregon, our 4-year cohort graduation rate is 68%. 68%. Every system is perfectly designed to deliver the outcomes that it creates. If you have a system and you're getting an outcome, it is intended to make that outcome happen, or it's perfectly designed to make that outcome happen. The only way to change that outcome is to go change the system. And so we have to have a profound system change in the state of Oregon in order to get to 40-40-20. It demands that, it calls for it, and so that's what we're attempting to do. One of the things that we have begun to put in place is what we're calling a P through 20 system. And P stands for prenatal, and 20 stands for graduate school. So we're trying to think about this system in education no longer as these pieces of a system, right? Like prenatal and very early childhood, 3 to 4 years old, kindergarten through grade 5, grade 6 through 8, grades 9 through 12, and then community college or college, and then graduate school. We're trying to say this is one system, so let's think about it as a whole. So there's a group called the Oregon Education Investment Board. It's a group, and this is what they're tasked with doing, is trying to think about how you would use resources in the state to make sure that this system is as capable at getting the outcomes that we want for the state and for individuals, for students in the state, as possible. Where do you invest? I remember I was a high school principal in McMinnville in 1998, and we had a really bad budget problem. Should sort of sound familiar, right? This has been a career, almost a career-long issue for me in Oregon. We had a really big budget problem, and I was sitting with all the principals in the district, and I was the high school principal. The district was one high school, one big high school. And we were having a conversation about, well, where should we make reductions in the district? And at some point in time, I came to realize as a high school principal that if we didn't make reductions at the high school and save money so that we could really invest in the early grades, that it was sort of going to be this thing that it didn't really matter. I mean, if students couldn't read by the end of 3rd grade, what good would it be for us to move them through this system and have them show up in my high school where I was principal and not be strong readers? And so at that moment I said, well, let's reduce these things at the high school and put the dollars and make sure that we don't do any reductions at the elementary level. And it simply was trying to be practical about how this system was going to work so that we got what we intended to have at the end of the day. Right? If you had to make cuts, that was just something to think about. So if I said to you, instead of thinking about how we're going to fund K-12 or how we're going to fund college or we're going to fund early childhood, let's think about where are the best investments that we could make along the K through, or the P through 20 system. Where would you do that? Would you think about how you spend dollars or resources in a different way than you do now? And that's the question that the Oregon Education Investment Board needs to think about. At the Department of Education specifically, legislation out of the last session moved early childhood into the Department of Education. And it really is a sort of an interesting shift because the early childhood used to be, and I'm not going to get the name right, but I want to say Department of Labor, and that's not exactly right. But, well, I'll just call it that for sake of argument because it'll be easy for me to say that I was almost right. So anyway, so that's where the department used to be, and now they're in the Department of Education. And the shift really is that that department should not be about child care. Oh, it's the Department of Labor, there we go. So that people could work. It should be about, when we have that time frame, ensuring that we're moving students along an education continuum. So it should be about education, not about daycare. And that's really an interesting and fundamental shift in the way we're going to think about that time frame. And in fact, that we should be thinking about education from the time that a woman enters, is pregnant, so prenatal, and just like what the nutrition looks like, what their exercise looks like, what kind of education we can provide around working with the child at the earliest levels that's going to help them be more successful as they move forward, so that we ensure that students arrive at kindergarten ready to learn. So what are we going to do in the early childhood system that looks like that? And so we have this new effort in early childhood that is centered more around education than we've ever had before. And then the K through 12 system, and at the upper end of the K through 12 system, we're really interested in making sure that we begin transition efforts when students are still in high school so that whatever their next step is, is going to be more likely, more possible, and easier for them to accomplish. So here is kind of one of those interesting things. How many people have students in high school right now? Junior and senior year only, right? Keep your hand up. All right. So I'm an ex-high school principal, and so I think about this a lot. And by the way, I have 2 adult kids, so I thought about it a lot from a very personal perspective when my kids were in school. My son graduated from high school with 73 college credits. He was a second semester sophomore at U of O the day that he stepped onto campus. I see students in the state right now that are earning 100, 105, 115 college credits while they're still in high school. So how do we systematize that, and then how do we make sure that those credits count when they show up at their college? Because right now in the state of Oregon, you can take an advanced placement course, pass it with the prerequisite score to get college credit, and go to an Oregon college and have that Oregon college say, we're not going to count that. You got to take that class again. Or we can have students who take a course at a community college and transfer to one of our universities and have the college say that credit that you took at the community college doesn't count. Or you can go from one community college to another one and have it not count, or from one college to another and have it not count. That doesn't make sense. Those are some of the things that we're trying to grab a hold of, smooth out, and fix when we talk about a P220 system. When we talk about prenatal to graduate school. Let's not have that happen. Let's have it make sense. Why would we want to have a student show up with college credits, not have some of them count, have to take the class again so that they're a little bit bored, burn through some of their scholarship or some of their other kind of grant money, and then take money out of a parent's pocket and their pocket that they've been saving up to have their child go to college? Right? And that's just a really easy example for people to wrap their head around. There are tons of things just like that throughout the system that we've always had because we've had a split up system. We no longer have that. We're trying to figure out how to smooth that out and then also how to invest in the right place. There were 4 investments that came out of the last legislative session. In addition to the awesome advocacy, by the way, that all kinds of advocacy groups did on behalf of schools in the state. You all, PTA, are fabulous advocates in the legislature, and we were able to secure more funding out of this last session than we've ever had before, and then also just had a special session, right? And so you and COSA and a whole bunch of other people together causing that to happen. So I just want to say thank you for that, because that funding is really important for what we're going to be able to do in our schools. But there were 4 big initiatives that we put forward. One of them was reading by the end of 3rd grade. So we were able to secure a fairly significant amount of money to think about how do we make sure that students are going to be able to read by the end of 3rd grade. As a superintendent, I used to think that meant that we had to really, that we had sort of this hair on fire emergency from kindergarten to the end of 3rd grade to make sure that students were going to be strong readers. I don't think about that way anymore. Now I think about it from prenatal to the end of 3rd grade. So we've got a bunch more years now to work on this because we have a P through 20 system. And so what do those investments look like? And some of them are about what kind of prenatal care do we get. Some of them are, how do we talk to parents who are brand new parents about how to work with their child so that they are going to get some pre-reading skills, that they're going to get some pre-numeracy skills so that they're ready to do math. They don't show up in my room in high school and say, I don't expect my child to know how to do math because I wasn't very good at that either, right? Even just about how you message that kind of thing with your child. And so there are those pieces of work very early on. The brand new kindergarten assessment that some students just took. There's a dip about, are these students kinder ready or not? And so if they are, how do we move them forward from that point? And if they're not, what kind of experiences did they have before they got here, and how would we improve on those? So it's just that kinder assessment is a dipstick to try to figure those things out in the state. So that was one, is working on reading, making sure that all students are readers by the end of 3rd grade. And by the way, that is a critical step along the way. We live in the information age. And in the information age, if you cannot access and work with information, it is very difficult for you to be successful as an adult. And so reading is the key to being able to access information. I cannot figure out, it would be so difficult to have a living wage job if you're not a reader. And it's really, you can teach people to read after third grade, but it is a very difficult, time-consuming, and expensive proposition. So that is goal one. Number two was science, technology, engineering, and math. We want to make sure that our students are getting the kind of education that will allow them to be excited about what it is that they are going to do as an adult or be as an adult, what their work is going to look like. And then also that we prepare them for the kinds of work that are going to exist in the future. Science, technology, engineering, and math. There are all kinds of possibilities that are available right now. And so we have a really strong focus on reinvigorating or invigorating programs around those four topics. So we have an initiative in the state on that. And the last one is what we call our College Going Initiative, which is some of what I just talked about. How do we think about making sure that students are earning college credits and that they're being taught at the right level, especially in the junior and senior year, that those credits transfer and make them more likely to go on to college if they're headed in that direction and be successful in that. So we have a strong initiative around that. And the last one, the most important, and it's also the biggest initiative, is around educator effectiveness. We want to make sure that we do a really good job of helping teachers be absolutely the best that they can. We all know that when we have a highly skilled teacher in front of students, that those students are much more likely to learn. And so there are lots of things that we can do around attracting the best and brightest in the profession, making sure that the training that they get is strong, making sure that we have a diversified workforce that's teaching children that look like the children that they're teaching, and then making sure that over the course of a teacher's career, that they get the very best continual learning and staff development possible so that they're a strong teacher, so that they have a mentor early in their first few years, and that the staff development that they get is right on and really critical about how they do their work with kids. And so that is a really big initiative that we have underway as well. At the Department of Education, there are a number of things that we're working on. One of them that I think is fairly interesting is we're working on delivering on this waiver from No Child Left Behind. So the state of Oregon, the federal government said you can get a waiver from No Child Left Behind, but you're going to have to meet certain criteria. And so we looked at what those criteria were, and after we looked at it, we thought we kind of really like those criteria. We think that if we did those things, we'd be stronger as an education system anyway. Let's do it. So there were three things we needed to do to get our waiver. Number one was we needed to create a new Oregon report card. So the Oregon report card is that report you get home about your child's school, usually sometime around this time of year. And there will be a public release of the new report card next week, I think next Thursday. And so you get a look at that. We redesigned the report card. We think it is going to give you information that you'll find interesting, that it'll be easier to look at, that it will be more quickly and readily understandable. It says, here's how your child's school is performing. So we want you to have that. So that was one requirement. The other requirement was that we do different kinds of evaluation of educators in the state than we ever have before. So that's one that we're still working on. We think we have some great models underway. There was a Senate bill passed by the legislature in 2011 called Senate Bill 290 that required, under Oregon law, for us to do evaluation basically the way that the waiver required anyway, and so we did that. And then the last piece is that it required that in our Title I schools, our schools that have a high level of poverty, that in the 15% of title schools that were lowest performing, that we basically have an intervention. The state would come in and work with that school about how to improve the outcomes for students in that school, the lowest 15% of Title I schools. So we're doing that work around the state, and we're starting to see those Title I schools that have been low performing really starting to move forward, and we're excited about the outcomes we're starting to see with students there. So those are a couple things that we're on. And then the last thing I want to talk about today, and then I'll take questions. So if you have questions, I'll be excited to take them. The last thing I wanted to talk about is the idea of college and career ready. And this is where I'm going to frame it, and then I'll get more specific in a second. So the idea of college and career ready, a lot of what you heard come out of my mouth today has been about college. I usually have somebody say, well, you know, not every kid wants to go to college, right? And I know that that's true completely. But what I usually say is college and career ready. one of the questions that we ask employers often in the state, and this became a really big debate when I was the superintendent in Tiger Tualatin, was what does career ready mean? And how is career ready in 2013 different from college ready? And usually what we find when we start talking to people about career ready, we say, what's the skill? What's the skill set? What's the knowledge that students would need to know in order to be career ready? And then you say, okay, well, what's the knowledge and skill set that students need to be college ready? And what you find is that most people would say those are almost identical. That what you're after, what students need to know, and the skill set that they need to have is almost the same whether you say college or career ready. And so a lot of times I say college, and what I really mean is college or career ready. And so what is that? What is that knowledge base, and what is that skill set that students need to have? And shouldn't our school system make sure that as students learn from prenatal all the way through high school graduation, ensure that as they move along that pathway, that when they graduate from high school and they walk across the stage and they get that diploma, that they are indeed ready to go to college and be successful, or ready to go into a career and be successful. Shouldn't that be the case? So what's the set of standards that would cause you to know that that's the case? So there's been a lot of discussion and debate about that across the nation. And at some point in time, Oregon, and I don't have any idea what the year was, I'm guessing it was probably about 1992. Oregon, as a state, adopted a set of standards and said, this is the Oregon set of standards. This is the set of standards in math, this is the set of standards in English language arts, in science, in social studies, in PE, in music, in art, and we created this set of standards. And those were really good standards when they were set probably in 1992. Oregon has changed those standards over time because what the world expects of a high school graduate has changed over time too, because the world becomes more complex and there's just more information out there, more learning that we need to have, and more skill sets that students need to have in order to be college and career ready. It's been a couple of years since we adopted new standards in most of the subjects in the state of Oregon. And we can keep on doing that work, but there was a lot of concern about whether or not our standards were correct, whether or not when students accomplished those, they actually were college and career ready. So a few years ago, the National Governors Association came together at a conference where all the governors get together and talk about what are some of the big policy questions across the nation. And this is one of the big topics that they began to talk about. And they said, instead of all the individual states going out and creating a set of standards, would it make sense to have standards that more states adopted? Couldn't we pool this knowledge and this work and come up with a common set of standards? And so they asked that lots of educational professionals, business people, parents, and so on get together and figure out what is this set of standards. And they did that work several years ago. That set of standards is now called the Common Core set of standards. The intent of the Common Core would be that we identify roughly what knowledge students need to know or learn on a continuum really from, this is designed from preschool all the way to grade 12. And if students were able to know that and we were able to teach that on the appropriate trajectory along the way, when students graduate, they would graduate college and career ready with that knowledge and skill set that they need to be college and career ready. What we found is that that set of standards is a lot harder set of standards than what we've had in Oregon. And in fact, I really worry about whether or not we've been honest in the state. If what we've been saying is that our set of standards had students college and career ready, I don't think it's true. I think it had them under college and career ready. And that this new set of standards actually is a really high set. It's going to be a big challenge for us. But that when students accomplish it, that they will be college and career ready. And that's the point. So a lot of people have gotten concerned about this because they want to call it a national curriculum. So what we've done is created a national curriculum. First of all, I think 46 states now have adopted the Common Core. In the state of Oregon, that was a piece of work that the Oregon School Board did. There's a school board called the Oregon School Board. It's a group of citizens who sit on a board a lot like your local school board, but it's for the whole state. That group came together There was a recommendation from a large group of superintendents in the state that the state board adopt this Common Core set of standards. The state board considered it over a lengthy, I don't know how many month process, and then they adopted the Common Core's Oregon set of standards. That happened several years ago. People are paying more attention to it right now because the first time that Oregon students are assessed, take a test against the Common Core, will be in the spring of 2015. So a year from this spring, students will take that instead of the Oaks test, and the Oaks test tests against Oregon's set of standards. And because the Common Core is a lot higher standard, there are going to be fewer students who pass the Common Core test, which in Oregon is called the Smarter Balanced Assessment. And so it will be a really interesting time to look at that and see how that all turns out, but I know that the passing rate on it is going to be much lower than it currently is on Oregon State assessment. And it makes me again ask the question, have Oregon standards been appropriate about what college and career readiness are? And has our test been at the appropriate challenge? When students pass that test, I think it sends a message both to the student and to the parent. This passed in the 11th grade, my child is ready. My child passed the prerequisite test, it means that they must be college and career ready. And then parents say to me, I don't understand, my child went to Oregon State, they took a couple of the entrance exams for their first classes, and those exams say that they have to take remedial courses. What's the deal? Not only do they have to take remedial courses, but they're having to pay college tuition to take remedial courses that don't count for college graduation. And they're burning through my money. How come you all didn't have my child prepared? I think it's a great question. And so part of what we're attempting to do is make sure that when students pass this test, it sends a clearer message that yes, indeed, they are ready. And we're working with the Oregon colleges now and colleges across the nation with the Common Core to say, what score would tell you, what score on English language arts would tell you that this student does not need to take remedial courses at college? And let's agree on what that is so that when they show up, they don't have to take that entrance exam. They've already done it via the Common Core assessment, and now they're ready to just move into college varying credit courses. So that's part of what we're doing there. It certainly is something that's controversial in some ways because it creates more of this national look at what the curriculum looks like, even though it's not been adopted by the federal government, it's not been adopted by the U.S. Department of Education. They are sort of finding ways to incent states to want to participate, right? Because they hold some big purse strings, and so they have incented states to some degree to do that. The other point I want to make about Common Core before we move on, then I'll start taking questions, is this. What Common Core basically says is, here's the skill that a student needs to know by the end of X grade. Pick the grade, so I'm just going to pick third. What math skill set should students know by the end of third grade? How many people in here think they know precisely what math skill set students should have mastered by the end of third grade? See one person with their hand up. Good. Nice. Are you a teacher? There we go. Thank you. Okay, so teachers know, and by the way, that's a really important consideration. All the teachers know. This is the standard. This is the skill set that students need to have mastered by the end of third grade. Now, how do you teach students to master that skill set? That is not part of the Common Core. How you want to teach it? Not Common Core's business. Currently, not the state's business. I don't ever see us actually getting into that business, honestly. What we might talk about is how you effectively teach at all, and let's help you do that, but not how you teach this precisely. Right? So how do you teach 3 times 7 is 21? There's lots of ways to teach that. You have at it, but you got to know that by the end of third grade. Right? I think by the end of second grade, actually. But you need to know that. So that's, I think, a really important consideration when it comes to that. And I will stop now and be happy to answer questions. And you all just give me the hook whenever I'm supposed to stop. Yes, ma'am?
Will there be a campaign to help more parents understand what the Common Core is?
Everybody get that? Will there be a campaign to help more parents understand what the Common Core is? Yes. That's part of me being here today, is the campaign around that. But that's just a tiny, tiny part. But yes, we have some things that are sort of coming out on that so that we can do that. I don't know how effective it will be, but we'll want it to be as effective as we can possibly make it. Middle.
So you're saying that the Department of Ed is not articulating how teachers need to teach Common Core, and that's a good thing, is what I'm hearing you say. Yet there are new standards on how teachers have to grade, correct? Effort versus ability. Is that part of the Common Core? And if you're having to assess based on how students are learning, it seems like you need to teach in a way that would allow that assessment. Which begs the question in my mind, is this is more teacher education. Our teachers' classrooms are getting bigger, bigger, bigger. Their time is less and less and less. And what I'm particularly concerned about as a parent is, where the heck are the dollars coming from to support our teachers, get them into smaller classrooms so they are not so overburdened by the administrative obligations they have. They taught our kids how to take Oaks tests for years. You know, I'm on my 3 kids across the span, and I watched them learn how to color in the bubbles. And then I watched them learn how to take tests on the computer. And now here's a new way that they need to take tests. And it may be great that they aren't, dictated to how to teach their content, but that's implied into how to do the assessment. So where's the support coming for that? Sorry.
Well, I already have like such a big question, I'm not sure that I can keep track of it. So how about I answer that and then maybe, is that okay? Because like I want to answer your question. There were a lot of parts to it, so I'm going to start with the first part, and when I do that, then maybe you want to expand on the part that I didn't get to yet, because I know I'll forget part of it. So, and I tried really hard. But the first question had to do with well, I think of it as House Bill 2220, which is how you grade sort of what people do, or students do. This is a really, wow, this has been like a, Keystone Cops probably on 2220. So there was a bill passed in 2000, I think it was passed in 2011, called House Bill 2220. I was superintendent of a school district. I didn't know about House Bill 2220 until about, 7 months ago or so when I was doing this job. And 2220 basically said, we need to make sure and grade students, I misspoke, we need to make sure and issue a report to parents that tells them how their child's doing against the knowledge that they're supposed to have learned. And so that's a really important concept. You would think, well, doesn't that just mean a grade, right? But it doesn't, because there's lots of stuff that goes into grades in the traditional sense of what we call grades. So the bill said that school districts have to do 2 things. 1, issue a report that tells the parent how their child is performing as compared to the standards, which in English language arts and math, the standards are Common Core. In all the other subjects, they're Oregon standards. So tell them that. And then give a grade that identifies that. This is hard. So give a grade that tells the parent how the child is doing compared to the standards. Because if I start talking about standards, people start to lose what it is I'm talking about. But if I say, in the English language arts standards, your child is exceeding, I would expect that you would say that would be an A. So your child's exceeding and they got an A. Your child's meeting, they got a B. Your child, generally meets, that's a C. Because people sort of understand that kind of a grade. So school districts have to do those 2 things. Beyond that, they can do anything else they want to on reporting grades. So you can say your child behaves well, your child behaves poorly. Your child gets along well with others, doesn't get along well with others. Your child turns homework in on time or doesn't. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different things. Districts and schools can do anything they want. They just have to do those 2 things. And here is the issue. We had students who were graduating from high school with a 398 GPA, going to college and having to take remedial courses. And the parents going, what's going on? How come my child has to take remedial courses? They got a 398. Well, they got a 398 because they got every extra credit point that was possible since the world began. They brought canned food to the canned food drive for extra credit. They dressed up on Spirit Day for extra credit. They turned in 2 dioramas, which their parents really appreciated, and got extra credit. They whatever. And the truth of the matter is, on the knowledge that they were supposed to master, they're really kind of a B- student. But they do school really well. They're nice, they get along, they raise their hand, they participate in discussion, and they do all the extra credit work. They don't really know the content like they're supposed to, but they do school well. And believe me, doing school well is really, really important, and it says something about the opportunity for somebody to be successful in their lifetime, right? How we get along and interact. But it doesn't say that the student necessarily mastered the content. We need to know, and you need to know, did the student master the content or not? What would their grade be about the content? And now give me another grade if you want to. But if that, and put that grade on the transcript if you want to. But if that grade is different than the knowledge grade, I want to know why. Is my child misbehaving really badly, or are they behaving really well? And that's why they got the other grade, and it's different than the content knowledge grade. So that's that part of it. And by the way, from my perspective, that has absolutely nothing to do with the Common Core, except you are grading to a standard. And that standard might be a Common Core standard if it's in English Language Arts and math. It will be a Common Core standard. So then the other question I think that you had was sort of this idea of classes are getting bigger, there are more demands, and it's really hard. And it is. My sister is a second grade teacher in the McMinnville School District. My son is a high school science teacher in Albany. And there are lots of educators in my family that don't make me right. I will drive you all crazy. But the bottom line is class sizes have gotten a lot bigger. We've been in this recession. Over 50% of the state budget goes into education. Not K-12, it's about 38 for K-12, but if we include early childhood and college, it's about 52%, I think. So the state budget goes into education. And we're in a recession, and we live in a state that is an income tax predominant state. When you're in a recession and you rely on income tax to do things, and your unemployment rate goes from 6% to 12.5%, and incomes stop rising, and then you have a really, really big problem on your hands. And so we got into that situation in this state. And honestly, we are one of the least resilient states to recession because we have a capped property tax. We rely very heavily on an income tax, right? And so, and no sales tax. I mean, I'm not the tax guru. I'm just telling you that that's the way it is when you rely so much on an income tax. So we had income really go down in the state. The truth of the matter is, if you live in an income tax state and you know that education and your educational attainment is the #1 predictor of financial success in your life, and you're not doing a good job of education, you are in a downward spiral that is destined to crash. Destined to crash. In a state like Oregon, where you rely on income tax, you better dang well make sure that your populace is very well educated, because it means that they're going to have high-wage jobs, they're going to pay more income tax, you can reinvest in your education system, and you can ensure that you're able to get to smaller class sizes. We have the exact opposite happening in this state. We've disinvested in education, we got into a recession, we had fewer dollars, class size has gone up, it's made it more difficult for us to be successful, and it's going to mean that for our future generations it's more difficult to be succession, and we get into a negative spiral. We cannot have it. That is why the legislature has invested more out of this session than they ever have before. It's why the grand bargain was important in the special session and the extra money we got in. It's why curbing the cost of PERS was important. And it's why we need to make really wise investments in education right now and make sure that we graduate students college and career ready. That's why, from sort of a state perspective. From an individual perspective, it's important because I want my child to be successful. I want them to be able to do anything that they choose to do because they're smart and capable. Anything that they choose to do. So that they can have a happy adult life. That's my #1 concern as a dad, is that my kids are happy. I want them to have the education that allows them to pursue their dreams. That's what's important. We have too big a class size, where our teachers are having to work too hard, and it is a huge problem for us. We have got to invest in education better and different than we ever have before in this state, so that we can stop that negative spiral and get it turned around. And I totally appreciate what you're saying there, and it's not appropriate for us to just think that because we ask of it, it will happen. Our teachers have too much to do.
So let me clarify my question in that long-winded.
Yeah, I answered too long.
No, in my long-winded question,
Oh,
is what I'm saying.
well.
Not yours. I'm sorry. My long-winded question. So, is OAKS going to be the tool to evaluate whether kids are getting Common Core?
No.
Okay, so there will be a new assessment
There will be.
process, and that was where my question got lost. Teachers, are they going to be given the time and resources to implement that new assessment tool? Because my understanding is the assessment is much more laborious for both students and teachers, much more writing, much more objective or subjective evaluation. And so that's what my concern is that where is that time coming from? Is it coming from our classrooms and our kids?
Great concern. Really good concern. The short answer is yes. I mean, anytime we take up time in school, it takes out of something else that we're going to do. Out of the legislature, we secured $10.5 million to work on educator effectiveness and implementation of the Common Core. Those two things go hand in hand, we believe, in the state, and we will be rolling out an initiative, too late, I believe, but still with all haste and force that we possibly can out of getting the money in July, right? I wish we'd have done this a couple of years ago instead of now. But about early December, we will begin a train-the-trainer model across the state on Common Core and educator effectiveness together. And it will be in every school district in the state that chooses to participate. We've got to scale it up. We're partnering with ourselves, COSA, OEA, and the Chalkboard Project to roll this out across the state. So we've got a bunch of really good educational partners in doing that. I think that it will help a lot. It's going to take a lot to get there. The OAKS assessment. In the past, students have been able to take the OAKS test 3 times. So I might take the OAKS test 3 times for math and 3 times for English language arts in any given year, and it's too much. One of the things about Smarter Balanced is, and that's the assessment that goes with Common Core that Oregon's adopted, this test called the Smarter Balanced assessment. It's a test that that requires bringing together more thinking skills in the way that you answer the questions. It's not a multiple choice test. It isn't, some of it's multiple choice, but there's a lot more writing, a lot more deep questions that ask students to actually perform a task as opposed to just do bubbling, including some writing. So we think it's a better assessment. It is a fairly time-intensive assessment. 3.5 hours on it is what they're telling us right now, so it takes a while to do that. It's a long test. That's going to be at the upper grades. I think it'll be a little bit less at the lower grades. And if you're teaching to the Common Core, you should, the Common Core standards, you should be teaching to, it should be the same as teaching to the Smarter Balanced assessment. And so we've got that underway. I do like that you can only take it once instead of 3 times. This spring, we are working to give districts flexibility so that 20% of their students could take just one test this year, and it would be the Smarter Balanced field test. So we're going to field test this new assessment. 20% of students could take it, and if they take it, then they don't have to take the OAKS. It would be up to the district whether or not they also would take the OAKS. So we've got that underway. We've got to get the state board to approve that, and the feds have to get us a little bit of a waiver on that, but we think we'll get both of those things done. The last thing I want to say about assessment is this. There are 3 kinds of assessment that educators talk about. One of them is called a formative assessment. Formative assessment is sort of like, I do a lot of things from math because I was a math teacher. It would be sort of like, I write this problem up on the board and say to students, do that problem. And they start to do it, and I go around and I look and I see how they're doing, and if they're getting it right or not. And if most students got it right, then I know that the learning took place and we can continue to move on. If I look at it and they're not, it forms up for me something about what's happening in class and says, I need to reteach this, or I need to teach it in a different way because not enough students got it. That would be called a formative assessment. Formative assessments happen all the time, every day. Even when you say to somebody, does everybody understand, how many people understood what I just said? You ask for a show of hands and almost every hand goes up. It's not a great kind of formative assessment, by the way. Who's not going to raise their hand, right? But it sort of gives me a little bit of feedback, right? I was in a class in Klamath Falls where a teacher had students doing a little writing exercise, and they were doing it on iPads, and as they answered the questions on the writing exercise, the teacher had a laptop and it told her precisely how many kids were getting each part correct. At that moment. And so then she was able to think about where instruction needed to look different and for whom. That's a beautiful kind of a formative assessment. Then there are things that are called interim assessments. I think of an interim assessment as a quiz or a test in my class. And a quiz or a test, I really like this, that I would have a teaching partner. And together, before we started teaching, we would agree what's important for students to learn, and then we would both teach. And that's the way when I was a teacher, that's what I did. I go, what do I want kids to know? All right, let me write a test down so that I make sure that I'm teaching toward that content, and then when I give them the test, I'll find out how well I taught it. Right, so I've got a partner. We write an assessment. We teach. We do our formative assessments, and then we give that, and it's called an interim assessment. And then we sit down afterwards, and I say, how did your students do? You know, and she says, well, all my kids got 90% of my kids got 90%. I look at mine, it was like 50%. Half my kids got 90%. I go, what on earth did you do? How did you do that? What did your lesson look like? Help me get better at teaching kids what you just did, the way you just did it. And we work together to get better as teachers. Those, by the way, in my opinion, are the two assessments that are important because they have to do it with instruction in real time. I'm teaching, how are you doing? I taught a collective amount of information. Let me see how much you have retained. And that you can demonstrate for me that you truly have mastered. Now that I see that, I know how I should move forward with my teaching. Those are the two most important kinds of assessment in the state. And then we're going to have another one. And that other one is called Smarter Balance, and it is an accountability assessment. And when you give that, it's near the end of the year. I would also call it a post-mortem assessment. What happened over the past year? This year's life is done. What happened? How well did my school do in general? How did my district do in general? How did the state do in general? What does this tell us about areas where we might need to focus better around staff development so that we can improve the outcomes next time? That's what I believe that Smarter Balance should be about. I know that people will use it for big hammers because that's the way we get into things, right? It depends on what nail you're exactly trying to drive home, what that hammer should or should not look like. I would much rather say, how do we continue to think about getting better? Right? This is feedback. When I get feedback, how do I think about it and then use it to get better? That's what I would hope it would be. Or, I don't know if I answered your question fully, but it's a really long answer. Yes.
I have a quick comment.
I have 3 minutes, by the way,
Okay,
so I answer these short questions.
I have a quick...
Oh, I apologize. I told you I would ask you next. I apologize.
My comments are like responding to both of you as far as how does a parent know? Oregon Department of Education has a phenomenal website. You can go on and look at the standards and Common Core. And I really encourage any parent that has a child in school to go, particularly look at the math components. It will stab your mind as far as what is expected. As a teacher, I download each year, like last time I was on the site for 3 months, I download the standards and the skills required each year, and I read it twice a year because there might be some changes, and I put them in a notebook, and I carry it with me and with my appointment book, because no curriculum is perfect, and so as a teacher, we have to choose bits and pieces and try to create our own. So my last appointment, please extend my thanks and deep gratitude to the people who maintain that website, because it is the spine of my instruction and it is my lifeline. It helps me choose on those weekends what am I going to teach and how I'm going to teach it. So thank you.
So we've never met before, right? That's what the magician always has to certify. If you do go on the ODU website, I don't think it's that great a site, to be honest with you, but thank you for the compliment. But there's a wealth of information on it, and Common Core is really clearly spelled out. It is a high standard. Right now, say if 75 or 80% of students meet in any given standard in the state, we expect the first time we give Smarter Balance, it will be about 40%. About 40%.
Okay, quick comment and then a question. The quick comment is then that explains, if you've ever seen the Smarter Balance Assessment as a teacher, I have, it explains exactly why it is so important that every kid needs to be able to learn to read and write. Because if they can't read and they can't write, they will never be able to pass that Smarter Balance Assessment. And then my question was, I hear that I had to write it down because I hear that as you try to create a better infrastructure for successful students, you have put a lot of effort towards assessing and evaluating teachers. However, Oregon has one of the lowest number of days that students are in the classroom. With a budget that continues to not fund a full school year, is there any talk of changing the infrastructure to include year-round school? Because it's been shown that a huge deficit in retaining knowledge occurs with poverty-level students.
The question is around, have you thought about going to year-round school? I have. When I was both in Sherwood and as superintendent and Tiger 12 superintendent, we ran community processes to look at year-round school because I think there's a lot of positive around year-round school. Both times, the community came out in spades and said, no way, no how. We liked our system the way it is now, and we didn't do it either time. The Oregon Education Investment Board, I don't believe, has yet looked at this as a possibility around what investment would work. I think that at some point in time they will, but we're just not there right yet.
Thank you.
I work at Oregon State University and spent the last week with 7,000 students who were wandering around with like deer in headlights. OSU and U of O have the same situation, I know, so thank you for your comments on college readiness. It is imperative. Just a couple things real quick. You have to understand, as parents, you need to understand how when your students get to high school level, AP, IB, I don't care what the program is, how that fits into what you're talking about for college for your students. Like Mr. Saxton said, you have a son that is with how many credits?
73.
73. Our daughter right now, if she continues on the path she is, will go into college with about 50 college credits earned. College credits right now, undergrad college credit at Portland State is $191 an hour. You can do the math on that. The other comment I would have is that as parents, as PTA, if we want to help free up our teachers to teach, we have to be able and willing to get volunteers or get ourselves in the school, in the administrators' faces, in the teachers' faces, in the staff's faces to say, I am here to help you. I can sit at a computer and I can put data in if that's what you need help with to free you up to do something else. If we can't do that, then we're doing our teachers a disservice.
Thank you. So I want to make one last comment, and then I bet you can give me the hook, aren't you? And I apologize because I don't have questions. Here's something I want you to hear from an ex-superintendent. We did a review one time in Tiger Tualatin. This is about exactly what you're talking about, and access to content. And there's a message in here for you parents. Make sure that your child is taking the most challenging courses they can get themselves into. Even if they would say, I'm not capable of taking that class, baloney. Kids are smart. We need to do the job of making sure that they have access to content and do the job that they ought to have in order to understand that content. When I looked at the science curriculum in Tiger 12, we had 3 different tracks. A regular track that got you a high school diploma, a track that was called Advanced Biology, and a track that was called Advanced Physical Science. And you went through school in those 3 tracks. This doesn't exist anymore, by the way. We gave all juniors the ACT. ACT predicts the student's college readiness. With a high level of accuracy, they've done all these studies to know the score that it takes to be college ready and be successful in your freshman college class. When we did that, the students who took the high school graduation track, the easy track, 3% of our students were college ready, according to the ACT. 3%. 3%. Say it one more time. 3%. About 29% of students in the state, when they take that assessment, are indicated to be college ready. So the students who were in the 2 advanced tracks, 57%, which doesn't sound that high, but compared to the state average is unbelievable, right? 57%. So my question as a superintendent is, why do we offer this track? Why do we offer a track that only has 3% of our students college ready? It, by the way, is the exact question that's being asked by Common Core. Why would we offer something that doesn't have students ready for the next level when they graduate? So we got rid of that track. Now students can only take these 2 tracks. Some students were not ready to take those 2 tracks that were challenging. So we had to say, we're going to support them. We're going to give them extra time outside of that class so that we can ensure that they can be successful on that track. And if our students take it, they'll be able to get there. And the most embarrassing part for me is that when we looked at our demographics in those classes, what we found was that there were about we were a district where 40% of our students were students of color. About 7% of our students of color took the 2 advanced tracks. And for our Latino population, the first year we did it, percent of those Latino students who were college and career ready in science, 3%.
That's about what our numbers look like now as far as graduation rates for retaining students of color at PSU, African Americans.
So we have a big achievement gap problem in the state. That's part of it. And we've got to give folks access. Here's my point to you. Demand. Demand from your school. Put my child in courses that's going to have them ready for their next step in life. That's college and career readiness. And your children, demand. My daughter came to me and said, I don't want to take trigonometry. I don't like the teacher. And I said, well, that's really nice. See you in trigonometry next year. And she said, but I don't want, well, I understand you don't want to, but you're going to take it. And by the way, you're going to do really well because you're smart. And, you know, you've got to learn to live with people you don't like that much sometimes. If you don't like the teacher, too bad. She's a good teacher. I've been in her classroom and seen her teach. That's what happens when your dad's superintendent when you're in high school. So she took the class and did great. And went on, you know, she's a very successful adult. But my point is, you've got to demand. You've got to demand from your child. You've got to demand from the system. Don't let your child be in a class because it's easier or their friends are in it. Have them be in a class that's hard and that catches their attention and has them excited about learning. That's my little tip as somebody who's done it a couple of times. Thank you all very much for your attention today. Thank you.